We're- Hey everyone, this is Tyler Skinner with Women Making Waves. I am so honored today to be able to celebrate and talk about different cultures from around the globe, women from around the globe, and having them bring their time honored traditions and their family dances, foods, music, languages, and just sharing that with us today on our platform. I have Lata Murti, and she is going to talk about her background, her culture of. Do you want to go ahead, Lata, and introduce yourself? We just started talking about this in India and what a large country it is and so diverse within that confines of the country. But I wanted to hear more from you specifically about what it means to be Hindu, and also have some of the celebrations and the things you have going on.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. So my parents both came to the US from India, but quite some time ago. They were among the early second wave of immigrants from India to the US. So my dad came to the US in 1967. My mom came in 1972, and I was born in 1976 in Oakland, California, and have grown up entirely in the United States. And so I keep learning more about India and Hinduism, which is the religion and culture that, of course, my parents grew up in, and that they, in part, raised me in. Um, and I sometimes feel like I'm learning along with everyone else, but my learning is making sense of the experiences I had that I never questioned, maybe, or knew how to explain to others until probably the last 5 to 10 years. And so I keep learning. I also keep learning for my own daughter's sake, to be able to explain things to them so they know more about their heritage, about my childhood, about my parents. So, Tyler, I was just telling you that India is a huge country. It's the largest democracy in the world, population-wise, and I think we don't realize, even among Indian Americans or the South Asian diaspora, sometimes I don't think we realize just how diverse India is. Every state in India has a different language,
Wow.
completely different language.
How many states are there in India? Do you know offhand?
About 16, I believe. I
Wow.
could be wrong. Um, so my mother grew up learning and speaking 4 languages, because which isn't really unusual in India, because her dad worked for the Indian government, and so they moved a lot. And every time she moved to a new state, she had to learn a different language.
Wow.
But all kids growing up in India, even now, they learn the language of their state that they live in, and they learn Hindi and they learn English. And it's probably still an option to learn Sanskrit, like it would be here in some schools to learn Latin. So you could also learn Sanskrit. So my dad learned Sanskrit. So I say I speak, or I know, 2.5 languages, in that I can't read or write Tamil, which is the South Indian language that I grew up hearing, and I still understand it very well. Like, my mind doesn't even distinguish between when I'm hearing English and when I'm hearing Tamil, because I grew up hearing both and still hear my parents speak it. But it is an effort to speak it. For me, I can, if I have to, but it's a bit of an effort to speak, because I think, like a lot of second generation kids who grew up in, or still growing up in bilingual households, we get into the habit of responding in English.
Yeah.
And so we don't get a lot of practice speaking it, but I can understand it. I can speak it with effort. I cannot read or write it. I mean, some very basic characters and words I tried to teach myself one summer, but certainly if you gave me like an article in Tamil, I couldn't read
Right.
it. And but I also know Spanish, and I used to be a Spanish teacher, and I still teach Spanish sometimes to kids, and of course English. So the funny thing is now, when I try to speak Tamil, I think in Spanish, so the Spanish comes out.
Well,
Um,
that helps me sometimes. I actually speak Spanish as well, and that helps me. A
mhm,
little bit of those roots, the root in Latin, it does help me with other languages. It has. I mean, not to say that it translates directly, but you can kind of understand to pronounce things, and
mhm.
it's helped me quite a bit actually in time. So I can see why you'd think in Spanish.
Well, definitely, and, I I mean, having grown up in a bilingual household with parents who grew up learning more than one language, I when the opportunity came around to learn another language in school, and that was in upstate New York, where I first grew up, and in 6th grade, you had the option of taking French or Spanish. It wasn't an elective, it was a required course, and I think I was gonna take French because that's what all my friends were taking, and my dad said, "No, you're you're taking Spanish." And my dad rarely, said you have to do this, but he was pretty firm that I had to take Spanish. He said,
Yeah.
because it's so useful and practical. And he says, I wish I had learned Spanish, in the US. And so I started taking it. And after growing up in a bilingual household, it just came easily to me. And I think, research has shown that once you are bilingual or you've grown up hearing more than one language, it's very easy to pick up more because your brain is trained to think in different ways. So I started in the middle of my 6th grade year. My family moved from upstate New York to rural southeast Kansas, which is another story in itself.
That's a big move. That's a big
That's a
jump.
huge move.
Yeah. I
And
mean, culturally,
no,
that's a huge change.
it is, and I actually spoke about that to a group yesterday. But yeah, I moved to upstate New York, and there was no Spanish offered in 6th grade, but I wanted to keep learning it, and
Mhm.
my parents supported that. I was afraid I'd lose the ability, and I liked it. So we did whatever we could so that I could continue. I did private summer lessons with second generation Spanish speaker there. It was an elective, I think, at my middle school starting in 7th or 8th grade. So I actually did independent study with that teacher, since I already knew a lot of the basics. And anyway, I ended up majoring in it in college, just kept taking it, studied in Costa Rica for
Wow.
a semester, and yeah, I taught it to kids at a private school in Topeka, Kansas, where it was required. I taught for a couple of years, but then I wanted to go back to school myself. And I think actually all those experiences inspired me to want to learn more about my own cultural background, and not just in terms of India, but the South Asian American experience
Mhm.
in the US. And so that's what I focused on in graduate school at USC. My master's and PhD are in American Studies and Ethnicity,
Wow.
which is basically ethnic studies. So yeah, but I still miss teaching Spanish, which is how I got into Peace Academy of the Sciences and Arts in San Luis Obispo.
Yeah.
And before distance learning became the new norm, I did. I went into my kids' classrooms in elementary school if the teachers allowed me to do so, and I would teach like a 30-minute Spanish lesson once a month on a volunteer basis, because I just think that's so important, and I think we really do our kids a disservice
Hmm.
in the public school system by not teaching them another language, whatever it is.
Especially now. I think that
Mm-hmm.
especially with our world being the way it is, and so I mean it was always before, but I'm just saying now we're so aware that it's just we are global citizens. I mean, we're connected to people doing business and everything else all over the world. So why would you not learn something? And I think we're one of the few countries that do that. I mean, it's like very monolinguistic. Like there's just English and that's it. And when you do go abroad, like you described, or you go somewhere else, you see that like a lot of other places, they it's like required. I mean, they speak at least bilingual, at least
Mm-hmm.
two. And
Mm-hmm.
then from there it goes on however you want to, but at least there's two. And I think you're right. It is really important. I'm glad you're bringing that up.
Yeah, and I'm glad you agree because it for exactly the reasons you said. I mean, our schools claim to be preparing our kids for a global future and to be global citizens, but they're not teaching them another language until maybe high school.
Yeah.
And even then, it's the college prep route that take. Not everybody will learn another language,
And
and I
honestly,
don't think
it's
that's
not
fair
too
to our
late, but
kids.
it's kind of late. You
It's
know, I
too
think
late.
they said before 12, you
Yeah.
really absorb another language before 12. And then after that, it's kind of it gets harder and harder as an adult to learn a language. So,
Hmm.
I mean, so speaking of that, that's interesting you touch on language because um there's so much within language with actually speaking, but there's also an unspoken. There's this side of like dance and music and food where
Hmm.
you can connect with people without language. Have you experienced that with some of the things you're working on
Yeah,
or
it's
people?
interesting you say that because I think I came to that much later. In that I've just always been a very verbal person, a word person. I knew from a young age I wanted to write and teach. And I've always loved to write. And so uh, communication, language, words, being verbal have always been really, really important to me and still are. Um, and I did take piano lessons for most of my childhood. Um, but I don't know. I mean, a lot of it seemed like a chore after a while. It wasn't my thing,
Yeah.
but my parents had paid a lot of money for my piano.
They're like,
So,
we will play that piano.
yep, yep. And I'm still glad I did it. I mean, you learn so much from music. But I certainly was not a great piano student. What I enjoyed actually was composing my own songs if I could, which
Wow.
takes a lot of time. So I didn't do a lot, but I did compose a few songs. And for me, that was an extension of writing poetry because I liked
Yeah.
to write poetry. So composing songs was fun. But that wasn't something necessarily emphasized in the studio where I took piano lessons. So as soon as I went to college, I kind of put that behind me, except maybe teaching kids, including my own now, like the basics on piano. I always found that fun. But what really got me thinking about how you don't need language to communicate is just in the last few years, just taking a lot of dance classes
Yeah.
and dance exercise classes, and not necessarily Indian dances,
Yeah. What
but
are some typical Indian dances? I mean, since we're on that subject, I'm curious, like what are some things that are they do they have names to them, or is it just
mhm.
a style of movement? Is it by region, by state, as you pointed out? There's so many languages, so obviously there's got to be different dancing as well. I would assume different movement.
Yeah, it does tend to be very regional,
Mhm.
but I think what's happened, particularly in the diaspora, that there one dance, like the classical Indian dance, has become sort of the national dance, kind of like maybe ballet for Russia, and it's actually become rather controversial that that now like somebody's authentic Indianness or even womanness is now associated with this dance. So a lot of girls, like my mom, grew up learning this dance called Bharatanatyam, which is hard to say. It's Bharatanatyam is classical, like South Indian. I believe it originated in South India, Hindu dance,
Okay.
very traditional, and you can still see it performed. Lots of recitals. So there are lots of Bharatanatyam dance students in the US who
Wow.
give senior recitals. And like a lot of traditional dances, it was associated with religious stories. So it's a very expressive dance, a lot of eye and hand movements and head movements. And takes years of practice and learning, like
Yeah.
ballet. But the dances tell stories, and they often tell,
Yeah.
religious stories. My mother grew up learning some. She taught me a little bit, but I didn't take lessons. But I know many other Indian American girls, now women my age, and then now younger, like the third generation, who, especially if they live near big cities where there's an instructor,
Hmm.
they'll take that, and I think their parents see it as a form of transmitting culture and an authentic national culture. But
Yeah.
the question is, right, and I also, I analyze it as an ethnic studies professor and scholar, but it's like, what is authentic? Does it make you more Indian or
Mhm.
more feminine in Indian terms because you do this dance and you learn it? Does it make me less because I'm not learning it? And those are the questions, and that's the controversy
So
surrounding it,
there's a
right?
lot of femininity around this dance. Like it's like coming into being, is it coming into womanhood? Is that part of it? Are there a certain age where you start
Well, it's
this
mostly
practice?
women who
Yeah.
study it. I've known very few male Bharatanatyam dancers, but I'm learning they are there.
Okay.
And I maybe more so in the US, I think their teachers more open to teaching men, because obviously there are male figures in these religious stories. But I think traditionally femininity is associated with it. And I don't know if it's so much coming of age because you learn it from a young
Yeah.
age, but it's more about so much of culture is gendered,
Yeah.
traditional culture and practices, and so I think that's part of it. Whereas for boys, I've found, particularly in the Indian diaspora, it's learning to play the tabla or the drums, or learning to play classical Indian music. So the girls do classical Indian dance, the boys do
The
classical
music. Interesting.
Indian music. Um, and then there, of course, there are questions around that as well, like about masculinity. So
Yeah.
I didn't grow up doing any of those things, but
You're
when
learning
I
so much now.
yeah,
As you get older, like you said, you find this connection. I think especially being a mom, that makes you want to be, if you didn't grow up with it, you're thinking, what about this about me and about my back? I want to share this with my kids, I want them to know.
right.
Yeah.
But I can't say even now I'm not learning the dance. I'm not learning the classical Indian dance. I'm not
No.
learning the classical Indian music. I think for me, again, being just a verbal, a, a nerdy kid, really, for me, it was, I I learned through reading. I loved
Wow. Okay.
to read, but I think especially when I was growing up, there wasn't so much that opportunity or that option
Okay.
to learn culture that way, in this more intellectual vein. And I think even now when we think of cultures and we think of cultural practices, we think of very sensory things, right? And we think of food, we think of dance, we think of music, we think of art. And those are all beautiful, lovely expressions, and I enjoy all of them as a spectator.
Yeah.
But um, I I came to actually learning for me what it meant to be Indian and South Asian came later when I could actually read about it. So,
Wow.
um, and when I was growing up, I mean, the 80s,
Yeah.
there
Access.
wasn't
There's no access to those type of authors, right? Either people writing about that stuff. You
right.
have to get your hands on it and actually take that in. So that's important. I think this is a great point you brought up because we do talk a lot. I've heard so far in the series that we're doing with this celebration, around we'll get to that in a second too, because I do want to hear about Diwali. Um,
Mhm,
there is a this idea, right, about it's all art, music, dance, food, and you just touched on that. And I think it's we don't often talk about this side of the intellectual side of receiving information that way through the written word, or they talk about oral traditions, song, that kind of thing. But I think this reading about things and learning that way and having access to that, like what authors, who's out there writing this stuff,
mhm,
and writing it in a way that is not only accurate but authentic, but also being able to like connect people, like have you feel connected to your culture,
mhm,
that through the story. That's not even a story, it can be just facts,
mhm.
just facts and information. That's it. I didn't even think of it that way. Like this is a new thing that's been brought up that we have not even touched on so far. So this is pretty awesome.
Well, thank you. I mean, no, I don't think we think about that because so much of culture is experiential.
Hmm.
And what are the first ways you're gonna experience a culture, right? Food. What are the ways that first ways your parents are gonna transmit culture to you? And now, certainly, I mean, now as an adult, if, what I just have for lunch, I got Suki's frozen samosas because 'cause I've been craving them. I'm not a good cook. I didn't make them, but this is I had some for lunch with my 9-year-old daughter, and we were both saying, "Oh, these are so good."
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
delicious.
it's still very much part of my cultural connection, and that's samosas are North Indian, my family's South Indian, so it's not even like I grew up eating them a lot. They're very hard to make
You
too
can
by
appreciate
scratch.
it. I think there's something
Yeah.
to be said for the fact that you didn't grow up this way, like with that so much a part of your life. You didn't have just one way. Like it wasn't this, we're from this part of India and this is our religion, our language, our culture. And then you got to experience all of it. I mean, you have this appreciation for
Yeah.
samosas that maybe you wouldn't had if you were so deep into it. Like your parents were like, this is what we cook, this is
Yeah.
where we're from, this is our
Yeah.
region, you know?
Not that they didn't try. My mo
I'm sure
my
they
mother especially. But first of all, I think being among the early immigrants of that time, I mean, there was a first wave of Indian immigrants to the US, uh, late, um, 1800s, early 1900s, but of course, that's a long time ago. But, when my parents came, there weren't a lot of other immigrants, there wasn't a large community to enforce that, and where we lived in a suburb of Albany, New York, I mean, I was one of the very few Indian American kids. And yes, there was a Hindu temple a good 30 minutes away in Latham, New York. It was an old house that
Mhm.
people had pooled money together, the immigrant community, and bought and converted into a temple. It looked nothing like Hindu temple in India, but it was a space, right? It was
Yes,
a
there's a space to
space,
hold for
it was a
your practice.
community
That's
space.
great.
Um, and the outside didn't. The inside they made look like a temple. And so that was where the families gathered on Sundays. And so I did get and I realize now how much it influenced me. I mean, there were language classes being held there. There were dance classes being held there. Uh there was an essay contest on Diwali that I did enter. But other than that, I mean, it was mostly, those sensory connections, and it certainly influenced me. But
Mhm.
when the classes would come about, my mom would say, "Oh, do you want to do the language? Do you want to do?" Nope. Because
Well,
I also really wanted to assimilate
I hear
because
you.
I was really different and I was conscious of it and I didn't like being different. I was already growing up vegetarian and still am.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know what? That's the greatest thing you just gave, that little piece right there. If we could just freeze that and say
Yeah.
awareness of it, just being aware of it is powerful. At that, how old were you when you were feeling that and you were conscious? What age was that?
I mean, when my memory begins, it begins with just knowing I was different. And I think if you talk to just about um, any person of color, really, but anybody who grew up in a different religion or ethnicity or a culture, I mean, from the time they were little, from the time their memory begins, I think they'll tell you that. And it didn't really strike me until, the last couple of years or so, uh, but particularly since this summer, I think when the whole nation has been experiencing this racial awakening, this racial reckoning, I've heard it
Yeah,
called,
yeah,
uh, uh, rather late in my opinion, but better
totally,
late than never, I
totally. It is, it is.
suppose.
But you know what? Like I said, there's been a huge shift in our
Y-
world with this.
Yeah.
That there's so many things are surfacing even more so
So
now.
I would keep encountering this question of, it's been asked in different ways in different circles,
Mhm.
not just to me, but when did you realize your race, right? Or
Ooh,
when did
that's
you realize you were different? Or, and it's an initial question, I think, in racial healing as well, or in discussions to start having this. And it goes along with something I've always, not always, but during the last few years, I've said as well that I think our origin stories are really important. And so in thinking about my origin story and thinking about that question, I realized from the time my memory begins, I knew I was different.
yeah.
And part of that was um, from my parents as well, right? They were very conscious of how we were different and how to when to do what in certain spaces and how to do it so you're still accepted, that you're not so different that you're offending the majority,
Which
but
is hard.
that
That's hard because
it's
you're like
hard.
on eggshells. I mean,
Yeah.
you're not able to be free fully, like free in
Mhm.
yourself just to express yourself or say what you're always going, what if I say this? Or what if I, and I think that that's the thing is we've got to find a way to not feel that. I don't know what that looks like at all. Like there's not one answer. I also don't think that's the case. But I think having these conversations, and this is what we're hoping to do here, is if we share enough stories, it is storytelling in a way, but if we share people's individual stories and talk about it, there's a combination that's going on here. There's a common ground. What I've heard from you even today was like storytelling, just like these themes. Like we're seeing the themes come up, of what that means, duality, all the things that we're talking about with everyone that we've been sharing this with so far. And there is a thing to celebrations and all this, right? Too, like celebrating what each of us do. But as we're approaching Thanksgiving, I just know I was listening to my kids do their school, the story. We're gonna do this, the story
Yeah.
Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
which is not in my mind. I know it's not correct. And for me, I'm like, as a parent, you go, what do you do with that? So I mean, I rip it away from them, or I'm just like, let's talk about something else. So finding this other alternative to say, this is really not even our world, but our country right now. Like this is what it's made up of. And we don't all have to be, we have Thanksgiving, and what are we giving thanks for? And what are we celebrating? Really? Like that's what I keep asking myself. Like, what are we celebrating? We're putting a turkey on the table and like what are we celebrating? And people talk about gratitude, but it's like, shouldn't you have that all the time? I have all these questions about it. And it's like, why one day? Why is there one day of gratitude? So I feel like when you look at something like a Diwali, which you brought up, what is that? What do those mean to other cultures is what I'm trying to see. Like something like that, is it ongoing? Because I see other cultures doing that. They do either one day, some of them it's like a whole month, it could be throughout the whole year. So I just find it fascinating to see like where the stuff, the origins of these things and what the meaning is. I think Noha actually shared this with me with Peace Academy. She said we all got together at a table and it was like all of us from different religions. And I found that they went from a religious standpoint. I found that to be very interesting. And she said we found the common ground, which was peace.
Mhm.
Peace was the common thing that we all, I mean, love, all those things too, but peace. And I felt like, wow, that's fascinating. So,
Mhm.
and I had a friend who was a Baha'i faith, and they were talking to me about this one day, and they had this beautiful painting on their wall of all these different religions around the world. And it was like, same thing, like, what are the common themes and threads of all these religions? It's compassion or peace or love or, um, I don't know, humanity, caring. And I felt like
Mhm.
everybody, so if you look at that, I saw it visually, right? I was like, if there's a
Mhm.
visual.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to discover that too with this and share this with our audience and our platform with Women Making Waves, that we have more in common than we think. And what we celebrate and what we enjoy, it's so beautiful to learn about what other people are doing, because we should look at that within ourselves, like what is important to us and why are we celebrating this and what does it mean?
Mhm.
Like go a little deeper. So I mean, I don't know. I'm curious to learn more about Diwali. I know you have like what is it, Navadatri?
Navaratri,
Another one. So,
Mhm.
I mean, if you want to touch on that, I would be interested to know, but also anything else I've said, if you have a thought. I think your background, given your ethnic studies background, is fascinating to be able to share in some of this and help us figure out a way to bring this to more meaning, more meaningful dialogue.
Yeah, great. I mean, yeah, I thought it was interesting you brought up Thanksgiving because I'm just going through that with my kids and what they're learning. Thankfully, their teacher, for the first time in my experience, was really open to other material I found from teaching tolerance, um, and the National American Indian Museum. I think that's what it's called, the Smithsonian. And I shared materials with her. So, and she's assigned them as extra credit
That's
to the
great.
kids. But yeah, I feel like I'm always still learning about Thanksgiving and I'm always still learning about Hindu holidays as well because I
Yeah.
didn't really grow. I mean, so I think Diwali probably for most kids in India and the US is a lot like Christmas in the US in that, and I want to emphasize that Diwali is not Christmas because it's often described as, oh, it's the Indian Christmas
Mhm.
for people, outside of India to make sense of it. But I really don't think they're very I really don't think they're very
I didn't
similar.
get that at all from the little I know about it. I
Yeah.
didn't see that correlation at all.
But people refer to it as the Indian Christmas. And I think it's also to say, oh, well, Hindus have something at the end of the year to celebrate too. That's like Christmas to make us all feel included in the happy holidays. I think that's part of it. But I think, just like Christmas, where everyone I mean, I feel like you can't not celebrate Christmas in some way in the US. It's hard to avoid it completely.
Absolutely.
Right. You're going to be involved in something. And so it's become very secular. It's become very experiential. It's just the experience of it. I don't know if everybody celebrating Christmas associates it with the birth of Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
I don't,
we don't in our household personally. Exactly.
yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think that has the same meaning for everyone. And so I think Diwali is the same way. I mean, it
Mhm.
has a lot of different religious meanings depending even on your region of India. But overall, it's about light over darkness, good over evil. But I myself only learned that in the last few years. When I was a kid, it was just, oh, that's the fun holiday they celebrate in India. And I was lucky that when I was 8, in 1984, so now I'm dating myself. So when I was 8, my family and I were in India during Diwali, and I got to celebrate it there.
Wow.
And that was very memorable for me, but that's what I associate Diwali with is that experience of mostly firecrackers. And that's the huge, big appeal, I think, for everyone, but especially kids. And that makes it so different from US holidays, except
More
maybe
like
July
4th of
4th,
July than Christmas.
except maybe 4th of July, right? But but of course we set off firecrackers for a different reason, but
Yeah.
here it's like days of fireworks. And I
Wow.
still remember like the day after Diwali, a couple days looking at the house next door to my grandparents' house in Chennai, India. or what used to be called Madras, and their front compound, you know, and really has
Yeah.
a yard. Front compound was covered with fireworks casings, like the shell.
They're
I
everywhere.
was like, what is that at first? And that was from setting off so many firecrackers, right? As they
Wow.
call them there, they don't really call them fireworks. That was the huge appeal, but there was also the more ritualistic aspects where you wake up before the sun, because Diwali's celebrated on what's, you know, said to be the darkest night of the lunar year.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I didn't know
no
that.
no moon. And so you're setting out all those lights, or deepas, or also known as diyas, which are the little oil lamps. That's why it's called the Festival of Lights, and it's light over darkness. So you're setting out those lights. The firecrackers are part of that. And in the US, it's usually just sparklers, since
Yeah.
that's about all you can light
Yeah,
off.
they're not
And
gonna let you light some huge
no.
balloons or something.
And just, you know, lots of sweets and snacks. And I think the best sources actually to learn about Diwali, because I feel like it has to be told in that sensory detail and the pictures and the
Mhm.
colors, are the National Geographic sites that I
Yeah,
found, and the books
okay.
that I share with adults and kids, even though they're made for kids. I mean, you get to
Wow.
see all the colors. But as far as the religious meanings, it really depends on the region of India. Um, and it will, so even what god or deity it's celebrating depends on the region of India.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I mean, there's so much to learn. Just I know we can't cover it all today. There's so much to learn, and I am enjoying this experience of kind of sharing and going through these journeys of everyone's individual cultural heritage, because I think it's so important to know that this exists and that we live here and we all share this space and we're all in these communities, but we're bringing something special to it. You know, you're bringing something else, and it's part of it, right? So some people are saying, like I said, the turkey with like they have like pita and hummus on the side, or they have, you know, they
Mhm.
still have a turkey. I just laugh about that, but it's so awesome that it's like we've created our own version of what that means. So I wanted to explore that more in this series, is just what is the versions that have been stretched and kind of tweaked and looked at, because people want to still remain, you know, they want to have that a little bit, you know, have the turkey and maybe celebrate whatever we call Thanksgiving, but then also have this other part of their culture infused into it, which is, and because that's what it looks like. I mean, that's who their family are that are there gathering around the table.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily that everyone's going to want mashed potatoes and gravy and stuffing and all these things. So I feel like it's really beautiful to see, but it's also nice to see that these languages and the dances and all the things you talked about sensory, but then this topic was fascinating to me. This idea of not intellectually looking at how we look at culture or how we can learn about a culture. So I appreciate you sharing that with us today. That was unique.
Yeah, well, along those lines, because it came up Navaratri, I didn't know till this year, and I was reading about it, you know, outside of all the sensory. And Navaratri literally means 9 nights that you're
9 nights. Yeah,
celebrating,
that's
and in
what
that way, it's almost similar to Hanukkah. But and in South India in particular, what's fun about it that my mom likes to do with my kids is you decorate like these tiers. You create your own tiered or terraced uh like staircase out of boxes or whatever, and then you display figures of different deities, but they can also be people from everyday life. And technically, it's supposed to be like a hierarchy
yeah.
where the top are the deities, and then at the bottom are more the people that you need in everyday life, and in honor of their roles. And I just found out recently that traditionally altars for Dia de los Muertos
Yeah.
or tiered like that too. And we don't necessarily, have a special place for every figure, but we do the decorations.
That's
But what I
amazing.
just read is the holiday is really about female empowerment.
What, Diwali or
No, Navaratri. It's
ah,
about the divine goddess. It's about celebrating the goddesses because like in particular in North India, at the end of Navaratri, I believe, and I could be getting this wrong, but is Durga Puja, so it's for goddess Durga, and Saraswati Puja, the goddess of wisdom, is part of Navaratri, and so it's a lot of it is about um, feminine and female
yeah.
goddess.
When does Navaratri take place? Like, when is that? Is there a date that it starts, or
So
when?
the dates are different every year, but it's on a lunar calendar,
Right,
I
right.
believe. So Navaratri is usually late September, early October.
Interesting.
This year I think it was around October 17th. Things were a little late this year because Diwali is usually October, like
And it's
late
October now.
October,
Yeah,
early November, and it was November 14th. So just this
yeah.
last weekend. Yeah.
Wow, I'm excited to learn more about Navaratri. That's amazing, and that's perfect for Women Making Waves. We could have
Mhm.
our own celebration next year around that time, and maybe you could help us with that, like crafting something for the platform to invite people to come to and be part of.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I mean, I'm
expertise
still learning.
and design.
So,
Well, I'm not saying I know, but I mean, this is a learning experience for all of us. I mean, that's what I love about it. It's coming together, and I think it'd be nice to offer that and to, see if we can come up with something. We did do an ofrenda at our house too, and I
yeah.
think it's been a wonderful way for me to explain death to my children.
Mhm,
It's just
mhm.
been a fantastic way to give them that explanation that sometimes maybe scientific or anything else is not going to work. And I also don't want to make up something or make up a story about it. So I think that's nice to have um, this idea that they can understand. I mean, they're conceptually they're like, okay, this makes sense to us,
Mhm,
and putting up people's pictures and remembering them, I think, is a wonderful way to
mhm.
do that, and giving them the things that they loved in life. Sharing little trinkets and things that are special to them or were special to them, I should say.
Yeah.
So
I
these are
think honoring ancestors is
yeah,
a big part of a lot of cultures and faith traditions. I know it's part of Hinduism as well. You'll have pictures of older relatives who have passed away, on your home altar, not just at one time of year, but
yeah.
all year round. And like I don't know, I didn't grow up Christian, but it doesn't seem to be like honoring your ancestors. I don't know how much that's a part of
I
at
don't
least
know.
Western faith
I
traditions
don't
or
think it's a I don't know. It's everyone has their own way of interpreting it and expressing that. I really don't know. I just know that, we grew up, that's the hard thing for me too, is that we grew up, my dad was Episcopalian and my mom was Jewish. So we grew up celebrating both Hanukkah and Christmas.
Mhm.
So that was kind of like a weird thing for us. And as kids, all we cared about was the eight presents, right? We're like, oh, there's presents, eight. Our grandmother would come over
Mhm.
and bring us eight
Mhm.
gifts, and we played dreidel and we made latkes and we did the whole thing. And she spoke Yiddish, so for her it was very important that we learned, but it was very hard for us to get grasp that because it's not in our context.
Mhm.
So I mean,
Mhm.
I see that. I think it's just we didn't have any one set way of doing it. It was just we're celebrating both, and we want you to know both, and you can all figure it out when you get older. That's basically what I was told. You can figure out which way you want to go or what resonates with you as you get older and have your own family and create your own tradition. So that's
Mhm. Mhm.
that's what that's how I was raised essentially.
And I appreciate that because um I think that that was hard for my in-laws or um I don't know if it's when you're in the majority religion or a culture, maybe it doesn't even have to do with that. Maybe it's when you're you're so attached to your own culture, and then you're very concerned about your kids or your grandkids like being confused by learning more than one. It is, what I've heard people say, like, oh, they learn more than one language, if they learn more than one culture, they learn more than one religion, they're going to be confused. And
Yeah.
I've never understood that, because then I suppose I've always been confused, because I
That makes
don't
us all
see,
confused.
I don't, because I never even grew up with that kind of framework or context, like you were
Yeah.
saying, where it is just one,
Yeah.
like everybody in your community, everybody
Yeah.
is practicing the same culture, religion that you are, and that's basically all you know. But also, I think one of the things I really appreciate about India, because of its diversity, is there is this idea of coexistence
Mhm.
of traditions. Like, not just Hindus celebrate Diwali, other religions, and India has many religions,
Yeah.
and everybody celebrates Diwali now,
That's great.
including,
The whole country pretty much generally
yeah,
celebrates Diwali. That's so great.
yeah,
So
and
that's one celebration or one tradition that's united around the whole country. That's fascinating.
yeah, it really is, and there's just so much
I would love to be a
coexistence.
space satellite watching that go on the one night, all the firecrackers going off at once.
Actually,
And
there is
all of
that.
there is there you can
In
find I
a, I
would love to
haven't
see
seen
that.
it online, but so National Geographic has this series of holidays around the world, and
Yeah.
so I did buy their one on Diwali. And at the very back, like the last page, they have a satellite view of India at night
Yeah.
during Diwali, not during Diwali, and you can see that there's more lights
Yep.
um, during Diwali. So yeah, and it's very pretty. Um, so, but yeah, this I mean, within even families, communities, villages in India, you have, at least traditionally, you have religious practices and customs
Yeah.
coexisting. People practicing more than one and being okay with that contradiction, even if they see it as a contradiction, which they might not. It's not that you have to follow one way or one scripture or one, there's always been this coexistence of cultures and practices and traditions and religions. And my concern is not just my concern, but what's happening in India now is, and I feel in part to compete with other religions in the world for recognition, that there's a whole Hindu nationalist movement, Hindu nationalism, Hindu fundamentalism, that's now saying, well, there's only one way to be Hindu, and this is the way,
So,
and then contrasting it to Islam. And there are regions of India, because Pakistan used to be part of India
mhm.
until, so there are regions of India where there's there's a blend of Muslim and Hindu practices and communities and people. These were not necessarily rival
Yeah.
religions and faiths, but now they've been constructed and made that way. Not
Wow.
just now, it's been happening for a while. And so
Wow.
that peaceful coexistence is being lost. And that's the same thing is happening with Christianity, as there's a growing Christian population in India. Um, a lot of Hindus see that as an attack on Hinduism. Um,
Then you lose that sense of, like you said, the coexistence between,
yeah.
and that's unfortunate because
Hmm.
I think now more than ever we should be learning more how to coexist versus separating ourselves and creating these divides and differences, because I found through my journey, and it's very small, I found through my journey of talking with so many different people from all over the world that it definitely we have more in common than not. And I think if we really looked at that, it's just, but I mean, you have to be open to it. So I think and not everyone is, and I understand that. I just would, that's kind of my hope. It's my secret wish, I guess, for us to start looking at those opportunities to coexist again if they were there, and then also create new ones, create new space for that. So, and I think Peace Academy and the work you do, Lata, and everything else, I think with everyone that you're in contact with, I think you do that. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I mean, you all are amazing, trying to do the great things for our communities and for our world, and share your knowledge and experiences. That's what we wanted to do here today. So I definitely appreciate that.
No, thank you. I appreciate being able to talk to you about these things.
Yeah, it's great. This is what I mean. I figured to myself, if we're going to have a space to do that, this is what I want to create, is a space. I want to create a space for that. I mean, you can't always, if one doesn't exist, you create your own, or you create one
Mhm,
different,
mhm,
one that feels good to you, and you can bring people in, and that's okay. And then you can collaborate with other spaces, and everybody can just be together. That's, I mean, I know it's so idealistic, but that's kind of the way I see it. And that's sort of my uniqueness and how I grew up. What you were saying, you knew from a young age you were different. That's how I felt.
mhm,
It's different.
mhm, mhm.
So here we are. But I appreciate you taking this time. Um, it was wonderful to hear about this, some of these traditions like Diwali, which I've never known a lot about. I just came across it recently, and saw it and thought, oh, that's so beautiful. Look at that. And I've always admired, Indian culture from afar for various reasons, for the clothing and the color, but like you said, sensory. It was, for me, it was very sensory. It was either the
Mhm,
food or
mhm.
the dance or some of the things I had seen, through television or friends, sharing. But I think this conversation today was really fascinating, and I'm glad we took it that direction, because I think that's important to share too.
I know, I am too, and so, for me, there was this particular moment I could tell you that was an acceptance, an awakening and acceptance to my Indian, my Hindu identity, and that's in the 1990s there was a multicultural turn in the US, and that's when you actually began to see a lot of writing and literature by not just those in India, but more the Indian diaspora, Indian immigrants and Indian Americans, also Indian Europeans, Indian Caribbeans. Um, but and remember the year in 1993, there was a book that came out, and it's now, I think, considered a classic, and it's called Our Feet Walk the Sky.
Ooh, that's
And
great.
it's a collection of writing by women of the South Asian diaspora.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
And that was my junior year in high school, and I found this book at an independent bookstore in the college town of Lawrence, Kansas. We were visiting, and I'd never seen anything like it before in my life. And I thought, for the first time, I thought, wow, there are other Indian American girls and women like me
Mhm.
who have had similar experiences and not so similar experiences, but here they are sharing them, and they're writing about them,
So that you
and
could
getting
find it.
and getting published and
Yeah.
connecting with others. And that's when I found my voice, I think,
Wow.
as an Indian American girls, woman. I was 17, and there were other kids of color, girls of color at my school that thought I was really weird for reading this book. It got into some it it got into some heavy issues about being a
Yeah.
woman. Um
Imagine.
and but that's what I needed, and that got my interest in ethnic studies going. And then I started to write about my own experiences, because I realized, oh, there is an audience for this. There is interest in this, instead of, just always trying to assimilate.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it's okay to say we're different. I think I've heard this before about even just looking at ourselves. Like, we can notice differences, like our color of skin or our eye color, or what kind of house we live in. That's okay to notice the differences. It's sort of what we do with that is what matters. It's not taking it to it's taking a little level of more understanding and coming together, than versus this is what divides us. But we both like. I love this description. Yes, that person has different skin than me, but we both like to dance, or we both like swimming. we both like the beach. There are
Mhm.
common things, just because doesn't mean it makes us so different we can't be friends or be connected. And I think that you've definitely shown that to us today. And I just appreciate that very much. So thank you, Lata, so much for your time and for being here and being present and just and being honest and open. That's the key. I think a lot of people, it takes a long time, especially for women. I see it more and more, to be just who they are, find their voice, find their identity, find themselves, and be able to share that.
Yeah, and I think my concern is that that's um part of our professionalization, unfortunately, right now, that to be successful in the professional world, you have to be like a man. That you have to adopt these masculine qualities. I mean, I myself, and I've been sharing this more and more. I was told, both in graduate school, but especially when I started my current job, I was told that I share too much about my family and about being a mom and about my personal life, my family life, and that I was told that takes away from my power, is what I was told. And so don't share so much about your personal and family life, especially. And so I feel like I've had to be very careful
Yeah,
in my own professional life about how honest and open I am about my own struggles as a mom and a working mom, especially now with COVID.
yeah.
Um, and so I appreciate spaces where I can be open and honest.
Yes. That makes me so happy. That is all I want to hear, because I have felt that, and we are building that, we are creating that. And not to say it doesn't exist other places, not to say there's not other platforms for women to be able to do that. It's just something unique that we want to offer, and this is part of that for me, is bringing this element in. Just talking about diversity and inclusion, talking about hard topics like addiction and mental health. I mean, things that
Mhm,
just don't often come up, but are so necessary. So
mhm.
I do really value what you shared with us today. I'm so glad we could record this. We're going to share it on our platform for everyone to take a look at, and I will also share it with you if you'd like it as
Yes,
well.
please.
I'm happy
Thank
to
you.
have that for you to keep and share with whoever you wish.
That'd be great. Thank you. Thank you for doing this project.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lata, so much for your time, and I hope you have a really great rest of your week. And maybe you'll have some time off next week, whatever you're celebrating, whether that be with a turkey or not. But whatever you choose to do next week, I hope it's restful and relaxing.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye bye.